Well, guys, after almost 5 years, over 230 episodes, we've had some really good conversations on this show. And so this year, to celebrate Christmas, to give you a gift, we're going back into the archives and capturing some of your favorites and some of mine and re-releasing them throughout the month. This is some of the best we have to offer on this show. And so we're honored and excited to share them with you again on replay this Christmas. We'll be back again at the beginning of the year with more conversations, new guests, new topics, and some more fun. But for now, here are some of your favorites and mine. Merry Christmas and enjoy. This is the show dedicated to raising up the next generation of men of faith and character. My name is Mark Stanifer. Welcome to the Next Man Up. Well, hey guys, welcome back to the show once again. So good to have you with us, and it is my pleasure to be with you. You, just by listening, are part of the community of men who are about being and raising the next generation of healthy and godly men. So good on you. Thanks for being here today. And guys, boy, I got to tell you that today may be the best conversation that we've ever had on this show. I'm always excited to bring these conversations to you, but probably more so than ever with this one because it's such a fantastic discussion. We were honored to be joined by none other than Morgan Snyder. He's a strategist, a teacher, an entrepreneur, an author, a speaker. He's been working with the Wild at Heart team for over 2 decades, John Eldridge and Stacy Eldridge, and the work that they do there. A number of years ago, he started Become Good Soil, which he describes as a fellowship of leaders whose global reach offers guidance for the narrow road of becoming the kind of person to whom God can confidently entrust the care of his kingdom. He's a fantastic dude, and he graced us with 45 minutes of his presence for this episode. Normally, with our longer conversations, I will split them up into 2, but this one is so good that we're just going to bring it to you from start to finish in one episode. We start with this idea, the central theme for Morgan around becoming, and we loop all the way back around to it and end with that same thing, that same theme. And really it comes down to these 2 central questions that Morgan poses right off the bat. Who have I become as a man? And who am I becoming as a man? I know you're going to enjoy this conversation. You might even want to listen to it a couple of times. I would even encourage you to have a pen and paper or your computer ready to take some notes. It's that good, not because of anything I say, but just because of the quality of person that Morgan is and his ability to be transparent and authentic with us in this conversation. And just one more plug for Morgan before we get into the conversation. You can find his work at becomegoodsoil.com or at becomingaking.com. Both sites, both URLs send you to the same site. Becoming a King is the name of the book that he released a number of months ago, and we spend a fair amount of time in this conversation unpacking some of the themes from that book. Along with that book are some study materials and ways for you as a man to go deeper into this wholehearted, authentic relationship with God the Father. If that is calling to you, I highly encourage you to check out his website, either Become Good Soil or becomingaking.com. All right, guys, let's get to this fantastic conversation. Without any further ado, here we go, Morgan Snyder. So Morgan Snyder, what an honor and privilege to have you on this show. I'm so thankful that you can give me and our listeners a little bit of your precious time. Thank you for joining us today.
Mark, it's mutual. Loved connecting with you before the recording, and obviously, I could tell right away we're like-hearted. We're going after the same things, so it's a privilege to do this together with you today.
I had a conversation a few years back with someone else in this space, and I wasn't quite sure what to expect, but his comment has stuck with me. He's like, Mark, there's such a need. There can't be enough of us working to recapture the hearts of men and point them back to the Father and point the human Father back to their family. And so I welcome you as a colleague into what we're trying to do here. And like I said, just appreciate your time today.
Yeah, really excited about what you're doing. And Mark, what's so hopeful is the on-ramp to recovering our hearts as men is so accessible in our everyday life. And that's where, Eugene Peterson, who wrote the Message translation of the Bible, his son published a book of Peterson published the book. It was his last book before he died, and his son did the foreword. And in it, he said, if my dad taught anything to the world, it was that the gospel must be livable. At the end of the day, faith must be very practical and it must be accessible. And so what's so hopeful is we're visiting people right in their everyday life, but even simple questions like, what's not working? Really? And I'm not talking about oversolve it or a theological response. I'm honest to goodness. We're sitting around a campfire and a man that cares about you says, what's not working? Or where do you feel behind? Or for most of us men, is there anywhere where you don't feel behind, right? Behind in your fitness, behind in your marriage, behind in your finances, behind in your career. All of those are entry points. They're doorways of symptoms where if we trace them down, we can find the root condition of fatherlessness. And the saddest reality for the human soul for men is we've come to accept that as normative. We actually think that's true, but the pain is actually the promise that that's not what we were meant to live out of. And there's a great hope. So it's an honor to be with you. And we want to go after it together.
Well, that what you just said in a few minutes is a taste of, I think, what we're going to get into. There's so many different directions we could go today. But I wondered if we could start with this idea of becoming. And so this for our listeners, you've released a book in the last few months called Becoming a King. You have a website called Become Good Soil, which is also the name of your podcast. Clearly, the theme of become or becoming is important to you. I wonder if you could just begin to expand on that, and we'll kind of follow where that goes.
Yeah, I think it was a treasure trail that I recovered. And I think that's an important word of recovered about 2 decades ago, where I stumbled upon Dallas Willard as a teacher and a mentor. He's a sage, a brilliant theologian, philosopher, shepherd of souls. And he made the observation where he suggested the most important thing about a person is not what they do, it's who they become. And Mark, I remember when I read that, and it was settling and unnerving. It was settling because something in my masculine soul resonated going, I know that's true. It's about who I'm becoming. And then I was unnerved because I went, no one really talks about that.
Yeah.
We talk about what they do. Now my son's 16 and they're all talking about the career center and what will you do for a living? And my worldview has been so transformed over 2 decades. I actually see that as quite a violent question because the 16-year-old should be rather unconcerned about what he does for a living, for a lifetime. He should be very concerned with what's next in my initiation. What's the next piece and portion that God has in fathering me through a process of becoming a mature adult as a man? And so this question of becoming became very central to me as I sat under the teaching of some 75 elders. And Mark, I think these two fundamental questions came out of it. Who have I become? And who have I become? And who am I becoming? Who have I become? And who am I becoming? Because what we've become is a complex civil war. There are literally two people within us, rooted in the imago Dei, rooted in the image of God, but expressed out of the true self and the false self. And that's why Paul talks so much about this civil war. What I want to do, I don't do. What I do, I don't want to do. There's a civil war within me. So who have I become? And what we find is we have constructed a life right out of Genesis 3:10. I was afraid because I was naked.
Yeah.
And so I hid.
Yeah.
And so what we find mostly when we meet a man is a biological man, but a boy in his soul that has not been initiated, has not become wholehearted, and he's become a caricature. He's become an elaborate fig leaf to self-protect and make life work apart from God. And the who am I becoming is such a central question to the narrative, because the kingdom of God is a path. It is, Dallas Willard suggests that it's more of me belonging to more of God. It's not a one-time transaction, though salvation is important. It's a gospel of restoration, where C.S. Lewis says, heaven is the consummation of our earthly apprenticeship or discipleship. And so I believe these fundamental questions of who have I become and who am I becoming help orient a man to the interpretive grid that's actually the way of seeing that can lead him into life as it was meant to be.
Morgan, nobody talks like that today. And nobody's a strong word. You know what I mean, though? Like, nobody's using this language, like helping a 16-year-old to figure out his next stage of initiation versus what he's going to do, right? And helping guys to embrace the being or the becoming, not just what we seem to be wired and naturally inclined for is just the activity or the doing. And then one of the things that I've really appreciated so far in your book is this, what you just said, like I'll use my words, integrating the male initiation and the maleness and manhood and masculinity, all of that into this spiritual development and spiritual maturity. For so long, we hear, just be a good spiritual person or be a good Christian, right? But what you're talking about is how intertwined they are. Listeners, You can't see me, but I'm netting my fingers together as this visual here, because you're saying it's a part of being the spiritual person that we are intended and created to be is becoming the man that we are created to be. They're not two separate things. They're integrated.
Well, it's well said. And I think to take it a step further, it is one. It literally is one thing. And that's why we go sideways, right? There's a young man in our community right now that's close to us. And in one world, he's going to youth group and he's connected, with coming from a faith-filled family that loves God. And in another world, he's pursuing drugs and sex very aggressively. And there's a division within his soul. And what's so important is to recognize the gospel that he's encountered is not yet life. It's actually a bigger, better story for him to get laid and to get high. And I know that story. That was my story. I know that. And the human soul is meant to gravitate towards the biggest, best story it can find. At any given moment, a person is living the best story they know. And that's why, Mark, it's so important to understand every great story borrows its power from the gospel, and the gospel was meant to be the greatest story of our lives. And so to just reflect back what you're saying, because this is so crucial, is I believe fundamentally the scriptures are very clear. In the image of God, they created us, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. the heroic Trinity created us, male and female. He created us. And so what's so important is we will be either male or female forever. Our souls, the imago Dei, are expressed as man or as woman, and God embodies all of gender. And so I think a term one mentor used that is really helpful to me, super controversial in the world, but clear as day in scripture, is God is genderful. He's literally the fountain of all that is masculine and feminine. And so he embodies masculinity and femininity, but he's very specific in expressing those. And so when we understand maturation and initiation, we have to understand that it's rooted in gender. And so we have to grow as women into feminine maturity and as men into masculine maturity. And because we are eternal beings, our souls and our spiritual life are central, they're not separate. But we live in a culture that has simply lost masculine initiation, right? And so we need men, and indirectly, we're begging for men to be men, but they're boys. And so we have men with boys on the inside in roles that they need to be mature and wholehearted, and they've not taken a path and process of initiation. And so they are one and the same, and it's central to the Christian faith.
When you were talking about the heroic, the vision, the bigger story, it made me think of a talk I heard Richard Rohr give a while back. And I'm not going to get all the details right, but he was talking about brain science and how the development of brain science has showed that there's surges in growth at certain age points in the development of humans. And for males, there's one somewhere around the 14, 15 time frame. And he said, if there's not a big heroic vision to attach your sights to, those brain cells will die off. You'll lose that surge. And I may be conflating a couple things here. It's later on in the talk, but he talks about men just settling for things that are loud, whether that's crowd noise or concerts or military things that are just loud and they don't fit that need. But it's an attempt. It's an artificial attempt to replace that need of seeing a bigger story, casting a bigger vision. Which, again, my words, but that's what I was hearing as you were talking.
Well, in one way, I might be curious about what you're sharing is, George MacDonald said, "Every man that knocks on the door of a brothel is looking for God." Every reach for prostitution is a reach for God. Yes, it's messy. And most men wouldn't say they're looking for God. They would say, if I was looking for God, I'd go to a church. But most men have not found God in churches, to be honest. And so what you have to get to is what's behind the activity. Right? There's this beautiful Scottish proverb that I particularly enjoy, and it says, "You speak much of my drinking, but little about my thirst." And so what's important is when you see the young man, men are aggressive. They are power embodied. And so it's big, it's loud, it's music, it's activity, it's aggression, it's I want to win. What's so important is that is the imago Dei. That's the image of God in a man, in a boy. And now what we do with it is everything, right? Because now it's how do we harness that? How do we direct it towards the good? How do we put it in the service of love? I remember I was sitting at John Eldridge's house probably 23 years ago, and his kids were little. We were babysitters for them, and we're sitting at the kitchen table, and I'm working with John, and the middle brother comes yelling, "Sam's trying to beat me up. He's punching me." And so Sam and his younger brother come into the kitchen, and John stops our conversation, and he gets down on his knees, face to face with older son. And he says, "Son, God made you strong and powerful. Do you think he did that so that you could harm your brother? or so you could help him? And oh my goodness, Mark, it was this moment in parenting where I could just feel this strength rise in me of like, that's it. Like,
Yes.
he's beating on his brother, not good, because he's a boy and has aggression. And it was honoring the boy, bestowing dignity on the power, separating the behavior from the person, and actually validating his strength. And so when I have my teenagers and they want to do big, loud things. There's a hole in my basement from last night. Joshua had a study group with these teenagers, and some kid threw his body into our wall, and there was a very large hole in my wall. Now, I've worked really hard to build that house with my own hands, not all with my own hands, but much of my own hands. And both of the kids had this eye, because this is like the first big blow up in this part of the house. And I had this moment where I could be pissed. Like, why'd you guys goof off and put a hole in the wall?
Yep.
But through the grid of masculine initiation, it was so fun where I was able to refrain from reacting and say, you know what, Joshua? It's a lot easier to fix a hole in a wall than to fix a human heart.
Oh my gosh.
And so we can solve a hole. And maybe we can get you. And he said, oh, my buddy will say he paid for it. He'll pay for it. And I said, you know what? I'd rather him come over and fix it with us, because every young man should learn how to patch drywall. And so it was this wonderful opportunity to say, yep, I'd rather not a hole in the side of my house. And I came home tired and it was a long day, but the aggression is good. We need to channel it in the service of love.
So I want to read a sentence or two from your book, because I think it dovetails real well with what you were talking about, and you'll know where I'm going here. Here is the unapologetic premise of this book: the desire to be powerful, to lead, care for, and bring goodness to a man's realm is central to the soul. The storyline of what we do with power is the path to recovering depth and breadth of what God meant when he made you and me. That's exactly what you were talking about, is as we gain power by becoming adults, the initiation process that God Father takes us through is to be able to wield that power well, so that it becomes a blessing on those around us, not a curse, right? Like I think that's what you're saying.
Oh, absolutely. And then you have to ask the question, well, what's gone wrong, right? I Googled the news last week. I could have done it today, but I did it last week and just looked at the top 10 stories and asked the question, how many of the top 10 stories in the news today, any day, fundamentally are rooted in a man or men mishandling power? And it was 8 out of 10 of the top stories. And so here's the dilemma. What do you do with the Imago Dei, men embodying power? And we could unpack it more, but it's gender specific, but we were meant to rule and reign as men and women. Women were meant to rule and reign. They were given the command, Adam and Eve together, rule and subdue, be fruitful and multiply. This is all yours as co-rulers in very gender specific ways. But today we're talking about men. And so if we bear the image of God in this embodied power, what do we do with the reality where Dallas Willard says the primary work of God is finding men in whom he can entrust his power? And the story of most men is in being entrusted with power and it bringing harm to themselves and those under their care. That's devastating. And it's also hopeful, Mark, because that's where we recover masculine initiation. And we look to a future where we have wholehearted men at the helms of families and churches and businesses and governments. And we bring on earth as it is in the heavens. And so an example, my son turned, I believe it was about 14 where he got his cell phone. He was the last of his little tribe to get a phone. And I felt two things. Mark, I was really sad. He's our oldest. He's our first. And I also was excited, mostly sad, a little bit excited. And I had to unpack that. Where's the sadness? And the sadness was my soul's expression of my son's kingdom, the realm entrusted to his care, is now expanding beyond my borders.
Mm-hmm.
With this phone, he will have power and leverage that I cannot control. Right? Albert Einstein said, technology is like the razor blade being put in the hand of a 3-year-old. And so with this great power comes responsibility. But Mark, what I also felt the joy of is he was ready for it.
Yeah.
He was far more ready than I would have been at 13 or 14. And so we had this beautiful, simple ceremony to say, I bless you, son. This phone is yours. It's entrusted to your care. It's up to you what you choose to do with it. But make no mistake, a war is being waged over your life between good and evil. And here's the gold is the pressure's off, Joshua. Here's where you get to make your most mistakes. The best place for you to fail is under this roof. And so you have permission to fail. This isn't pressure. And you're ready. You're on time. We will do this together. It's dialogue. It's open. But this is time. You are ready to expand this portion of your kingdom. And I can tell you, my son's use of his cell phone is far more mature than mine.
Yeah.
He has a better reign over his boundaries, smaller kingdom, better reign. And it's beautiful to watch his kingdom expand. And so as we mature into wholeheartedness and learn to walk in union with God, we become the kind of men that can actually be entrusted with the care of people and things and do a great good.
Yeah, there's so much wisdom there, man. There's so much. If you and I had the time, we could keep this recording going for hours and still probably only scratch the surface. And don't worry, listeners, we're not going to do that to you.
And let's do it again some other time. I'm enjoying being with you.
All right. Well, I'm in. We'll make that happen. Hey guys, Mark here for a quick pause and a question. How are you doing as a father? I hope you're killing it and feel great about your fathering game. We need more fathers like you who are at their best. Unfortunately, this is not the case for most dads. Pulled in too many directions and not feeling effective, most dads, too many, are just operating in default mode. And default mode isn't working. Maybe this describes you. Maybe it describes someone you know. Maybe both of you. Here's the good news. There's a better way. You don't have to operate in default. You can be a father who operates from a place of security and confidence, a father who engages in a way that is customized and tailored to your child, a father who guides his kids in pursuing their own unique path. This is the disciplined way, and it's more than just a change in behavior. It is first a change of heart and mind, a transformation in understanding who you are that will lead to a transformation in how you show up as a father. Guys, why am I sharing this with you? Because this January, we are launching a group to help you experience this transformation. This group coaching experience will change the way you show up as a father by helping you transform as a man first. Now, I realize this group is not for every dad, but it is for those who are ready to change, ready to grow, ready to be captured by a vision for who their kids were created to be, and help guide them there. I've mentioned this for a few weeks now, and we've recently updated the website with additional information, including what this 10-week virtual group experience will include. We are building the list of interested dads now, so when the holidays are over and the new year dawns, we are ready to begin this journey of transformation. Whether you're curious or interested or ready to sign up right now, the next step is to hop onto our website, thenextmanup.com/dad group. You can find everything you need and get your name on the list there. Guys, if you're not where you want to be as a father and you're ready to do something about it, this group is for you. Head on out to the website. Again, that's thenextmanup.com/dad group. Add your name to the list and we'll be in touch soon. Okay, guys, back to the episode. So as you were talking about that, I'm picturing a couple of things. I'm picturing the life that you're breathing into your son. I'm picturing the The lack of what how do I want to say this? Like the responsibility that you're passing to him so that you don't necessarily have to be responsible for that, if that makes sense, right?
Yes.
It's like
Yeah.
passing the baton, bits and pieces, right? You've extended to him some more of his territory as you described it. And it takes me back to when my oldest was 10. And this is a good dovetail into a topic I want to ask you about. When he was 10, we gave him his first pocket knife.
Okay.
And
Well done. Way to go.
for my wife, it was too soon.
Yep.
For me, it was a couple years too late, but
Yeah.
we compromised,
Awesome.
and we made it this big event. And like, you're ready. We believe in you. You have to be careful, but we trust you, and go use it. And as God would have it, it wasn't but a couple hours later that he wasn't holding it right, and he put a nice cut in his hand. And
Awesome.
we happened to have an EMT there that was like, "Oh, this is not a big deal. We'll just stop the bleeding and band-aid it. It's not a big deal." But it was perfect, right? It was that freedom to fail in a safe environment with just a small blade, and he was ready. And it's those experiences that then reinforce how to use that power well, or if you
Yeah.
don't, how it can go sideways, as you said before. So that memory was resurfaced as you were talking. I know, from looking at your website, I knew you had a thing for knives. And now
Yes.
reading in the book, I understand why. Talk about that for a minute. What the knife has represented for you, both literally and metaphorically, I guess.
Yeah, there's a lot in there. First, let's talk about your son a little. What is his name?
It's Jacob.
Jacob. What a great story, and well done, Dad. Well done. And what I love about that is the one of the messages to his soul. First off, is my dad and mom trust me with this power.
Yeah,
That is validating, and I am wielding something that could be dangerous
that's
to
right.
myself or to other people. And I happen to cause self harm with this tool. And that's a great lesson, because you take a boy like Jacob and you put him in a family where, in a culture where he's not being initiated, but he's very smart, he's very gifted, and the world rewards his gifting. Fast forward 20 years later, he's at the helm of a church or a business with far more power than a pocket knife.
Yeah,
And he ends up cutting himself or other people.
yep,
And that's the story of most men. And so when you learn the lesson with a pocket knife, you can graduate to a chainsaw, right? But you don't start with a chainsaw, and you don't start with a company. But most men do, because they let their gifting lead them in a process where they've never been initiated.
yeah,
And so the pocket knife is very literal and very metaphorical. I had a collection of pocket knives when I was a kid, and no one taught me how to use them. No one taught me how to sharpen them. My mom was against them. My dad wasn't around to really make a call. And so I just kind of hid this really cool collection, but it was very symbolic. I wanted them. I knew they were powerful, and I didn't know how to use them. Fast forward years later, had this great moment. I unpack this more deeply in the book and invite people to go very deep into it in the study guide and the video series for Becoming a King. But my son was young, 3 or 4, and he's very articulate. He was in the back seat, and we were driving. He's in his car seat. And I said, Joshua, what's a man need to survive in this world? And he thought about it at 3 or 4. And he said, I know, Daddy, he needs 2 things. He needs a wallet and a cell phone. And Mark, he was totally right. He was
yep,
accurately reading the world in which he understood. Whatever else is going on in my dad's world, he always has a cell phone and he always has a wallet. And the message is, whatever's in those 2 things can fix whatever problem. And I was brokenhearted over it, because I realized I was baptizing my son into a world that wasn't true. as it relates to the kingdom of God. And so I knew I needed tangible ways to show him a man needs to be and become far more than a wallet and a cell phone. So fast forward, God brought a pocket knife in my world. And I'll be honest, it started with cutting open Amazon boxes or cellophane from steaks from the grocery store, right?
Yep.
I'm suburban. My wife drives a minivan. We've got a wooden fence around our yard, our postage stamp in suburgatory. That's where it started. Okay. But when I pulled it out and I heard that sound of a knife locking in a blade in position, it was empowering. It was physical. There was almost a message of God saying a man and a knife can save the world. Straight out of Mark in Peterson's translation, where Jesus commissions his sons, his apprentices, his brothers, and he says, guys, go do it. I'm leaving. I give it all to you. I give you my authority. And now what I tell you is keep it simple, travel light. You are the equipment. You are the equipment. We don't need to make it complicated. And so I began finding every place and possibility to use this knife. I learned how to sharpen it from an old man with worn hands. And I'd pull it out in a restaurant because it's my knife. And I would cut my meat with it. And people would be like, what are you doing? And I said, I'm using my knife. And over time, it was a place of initiation. A mentor, Aldo Leopold, said, there are two spiritual dangers of not owning a farm. It's in thinking that meat comes from the grocery and heat comes from the furnace. And Mark, at the time, I said, well, my heat does come from the furnace and my meat does come from the grocery. But it was no longer an indictment. It was an invitation. And so at that time, I said, I want to become the kind of person over time that my meat doesn't come from the grocery and my heat doesn't come from the furnace. So I started chopping firewood. I didn't know what I was doing. I asked someone to show me the way. Eventually I bought a chainsaw. I felt like such a poser. I felt like a fool, but I did it because I'm a son and I wanted to risk. And I read the manual and I asked questions and I made mistakes. And just last week I put up 2 more cords. I now have 7 cords of wood. This fast forward now over a decade, we now have a wood burning stove that heats our home for the most part. And I have 7 cords of wood on the side of my little suburban house. And God used archery hunting as a place of initiation and fathering, where now we've gone 7 years without ever being without a package of wild game. That's what I asked God. And I'm like 15, 20 years into hunting, but the last 7 years, I said, God, I think I've developed my skills enough where I could always have one package. And so we go to Costco and we do Amazon and we're like everybody else. I'm very normal. And I'm also very odd. I effectively lower property values in my neighborhood by chopping wood and using weapons, all for love.
Yeah.
And so I believe a man and a knife can save the world. And every man, I'm now speaking very boldly and I feel out there, but this is not a caricature. It's a recovery of essence unique to every man. Put a pocket knife in your pocket and let God use it to initiate your soul.
I've had a pocket knife for a long time, and I have braved some of the things that you've been talking about. Some of them I kind of learned as a youngling, and some of them it's just like I need to embrace something new and adventure. But I got to admit, when I got to that part of the book, I went and got my pocket knife, and I don't have it on me today because I'm not in the habit yet. But I'm like, well, maybe I need to start carrying my pocket knife more often.
Well, Mark, first of all, I want to celebrate that you went and got yours. Like, we are physical beings. Christ came in humanity. He was embodied. What we do with our bodies is very spiritual. Just your act of going and getting your knife is very important. It's an act of heroic defiance. And when my daughter says, my daddy always has a pocket knife.
Yeah.
And when my daughter says, Daddy, can I borrow your pocket knife? Something is restored in me as a man, and it's very physical and it's very spiritual. And so, yeah, way to go. You're doing it. And I want to invite others to do it with them. And women that are listening to this, I want you to hear the heart behind it. It's not a caricature, and it is dangerous. But men were meant to be dangerous for good. And if a boy does not have those on time pieces and portions of initiation, he will become a biological man with a spiritual boy on the inside.
Yeah.
And so it would do great dignity and honor to the men in your world and the boys inside the men and the boys in the boys' bodies, to bless them with the ability to be dangerous for good.
One of the things I like about how you say that, that dovetails well with a message that we constantly are pushing here, is this. Sometimes it's better to do the harder thing. Now, guys have strength. We portray strength, whether we feel it or not. We portray strength, and we want to be seen as the adventurers and the extreme sports and all of that. But I think really we back away from the hard stuff that really matters. Or we're too quick to go to, well, it's just easier, or I don't have time, or it's more convenient to buy the meat at the store than to go track it down in the woods, or buy the wood next door rather than cut my own and feel the swing of the axe. And I know this message isn't going to resonate, like the axe swinging may not resonate with everybody. But there's an underlying message I'm hearing you say, which is don't just settle. Don't just settle for the complacent or the easy or the less engaging, right? Lean into the things that require more of us, those things that are good. And maybe, as you would say, it's soul nourishing. Lean into those and do the hard things.
Well, when you share those ideas, Mark, which I really appreciate, I hear them with great compassion. We live in a world at war, and it is a very difficult time in history to be a man. And when we live in a culture that is so worshiping of convenience, it's quick, it's cheap, it's easy. It's very difficult to stay true to the process of initiation that we're made for. In Native American culture in America, it didn't change for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And then the horse came, and it was overnight. And then the rifle came. And in a generation, the culture was decimated. And it wasn't just the rifle and the horse, it was the invasion of just an overwhelming number of white people coming from Europe.
Yep.
But the idea was it changed so far and so fast. And so we have to appreciate we live in a world at war, and it's a brutal space, an unprecedented time in human history to take the path of initiation. But God is not surprised. And God is not in a hurry. And God is perfectly capable of meeting us right where we are and inviting us back into this path. And so I want to say it's totally available. And that's the joy. That's the excitement of being an apprentice in God's kingdom, is saying, I'm going to choose to risk. I will choose to do the hard thing, even if it's 2 degrees, even if it's 2%. You choose to do the hard thing. I was zoomed out. 6 Zooms yesterday, right? On a screen all day. And I was just wrecked. And I needed to review podcasts today, audio podcasts. And I got up this morning, and the efficient thing to do was knock them out on the computer. And yet we have a family night coming up tonight. And I had a big day today. And I wanted to be wholehearted for all of this, to be present with you, to be present for the rest of my day and my family night tonight. So I chose to get my AirPods and go to the open space, a wilderness area near our house, and just walk and do the podcast. And it's clunkier, and I'm trying to take notes on a sticky note. And it was so good for my soul. It was inefficient. It cost me gas. It cost me time. I had to cancel something to make it happen. But it was the right thing for my masculine soul.
Mm.
And so let me flip it back to you, Mark. On the conversation before, when we started, you were really authentic to say, you've done a lot of these. I mean, you put your 10,000 hours in, you're, closing in on 200. I think you said over 150. And you said you were nervous.
Yeah.
Going into this.
That's right.
So you had some fear and you chose to push through and not just throw your gifting in, though you're very gifted, and not fake it. You're engaging. I feel your authentic presence. Take us into that. What was your experience like?
Yeah. So the reason for the nervousness was not how do I do the technical and sort out thoughts and ask questions. It was, oh, this is Morgan Snyder. He's a published author. He's got a big podcast. He's worked with Wild at Heart and John Eldredge for years and years. And like he's the dude. And at the same time, you're just a dude. You're a dude
Exactly.
that has put yourself out there. Your space of vulnerability shares some of mine in this podcast medium, but you've also written a book and you've done all kinds of other things where you've put yourself out there. And so I'm going through this in my mind like, what an honor. Yes, it is Morgan Snyder, but he's just a dude. And he's on his own journey. And for a period in time, we get to intersect and share stories and make a difference. And so like I can choose to be nervous and uptight about performance and being excellent and, all these things that I want in my work product, a mastery of my work product. But that can get in the way of being present and being authentic. And so like it wasn't but a few minutes ago, I'm like, oh, that racing heart rate is gone. And this feels just like it would be a conversation if you were sitting in my house and we were having a root beer, or if I was sitting in your house and we're having a beer. Like it feels like a conversation between two guys who have a lot in common and have just met each other, but are in this shared space of trying to be an authentic man, trying to demonstrate what that looks like and encourage other men along the way. And in the process, become the dudes that we were created to be.
And I commend you, Mark, because it takes us full circle back to where we began. Like in your soul, you had a choice, and you had a choice to kind of put it into overdrive and allow your gifting to justify or validate your place in this conversation and operate one step removed from authenticity with yourself, with me, with God, and try to earn some seat at the table. And instead, you felt the fear, you acknowledged it, you were brave to put words to it, which is actually very heroic, very courageous to say, I actually feel nervous. And you chose to risk engaging with your authentic heart. And that's the fruit of this podcast that I believe God's anointing can come, because we're both here for God.
Yeah.
We prayed before, crucifying self-promotion. This is for God and his kingdom, and we are at his service. And so because you were willing to do the hard thing, follow God into the unknown, and I equally am showing up with my whole heart to be fully engaged, God's power can come and bless other people. And so it's just a micro example of in the rubber meets the road, everyday, ordinary life, that the magic of the kingdom of God is made available. One mentor said, we can see God in everything and miss him in anything. Mm-hmm. And so my hope and prayer for the listeners is that as they, as we're wrapping up, when they listen to this, that they would see with the eyes of their heart right where they are, right with the people and things entrusted to their care, and perhaps come back to the original questions that we started with. Who have I become? Who am I becoming? What if the most important thing about me is not what I do, but it's who I'm becoming? And what if there was a path and a process? And what if it wasn't new, but it was newly recovered. Every generation, Chesterton said, loses this gospel, this path of life, and every generation is charged with its recovery. And we're living in an unprecedented time in human history that doesn't surprise God. It's a perfect time to recover the path of masculine initiation for ourselves and those that we love.
So well said, brother. So well said. And as I mentioned a number of minutes ago, we could go on, but unfortunately, we are both under time constraints today. So I just want to honor you and bless you in the way that you have me, and all of the other hosts that you have graced with your presence. You are so good, so affirming, so encouraging, so present when you could be in so many different directions. And so thank you for that. Thank you for your courage and your authenticity. You know what it takes to write those words, to say those words, to speak those words, and then to release them to the world and not know where they go or who they were for or what might come back at you. You know the courage that it takes. And I mean, when we talk about courage and bravery and doing the hard things, it is opening up the chest cavity. It's playing with your cards face up. It is being, I heard a tribute this morning to Toby Mac for his birthday given by his wife. And it went like this. The public persona is not even close to the private persona that we see at home, engaged and blessing our family. And so for you to let us into who you really are is a real treat and a real pleasure. And so I just, once again, I thank you. It's a privilege to have you on the show. And boy, it'd be great to have you back at some point down the road. But even if it's just this once, it's been enough. And I know I'm better off for it, and our listeners will be as well.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, I'm very open to more. Really enjoy connecting with you, and just want to champion those hearts all around the globe, wherever you are, in the kingdom of God and in God's initiation of us as sons and daughters. We are always on time. It's not too late. We're not behind. And today, there is a narrow gate being made available to each and every one of us in a very personal way. And I did throw my whole heart and blood and sweat and tears into the mission and message of becoming a king. It was the fruit of 2 decades of discipleship. And so I did put together a video and a study guide for those that are really thirsty to take the time. And there's all sorts of blogs and podcasts. It's a fellowship of the few, available to everyone. But by responding, it's the few that want to go deep and get their whole heart back. And so if people are interested, I'd be glad to offer more. And they can find that at becomingaking.com.
That's great. Yep. Becomingaking.com is the site. Morgan Snyder is the dude. Thank you for joining us today, my friend. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Mark.
To send us your comments or questions, you can email us at feedback@thenextmanup.com. The theme music is by Jacob Stanifer at Jacob Stanifer Music, and this show is part of the NRT Podcast Network.